This is the Jim Nog Pod with Jim Noguera. It is the Jim Nog Pod with Jim Noguera.
Most interested man
It is the
in the
Jim
world.
Nog
Interested,
Pod with Jim Noguera.
the most interested man
Jim
in the
Nog Pod.
world. Interested,
It is the Jim
interested.
in the world.
Welcome to the pod. This is James Noguera, aka Jim Nog. On this episode, my conversation with Jan Robertson. Jan Robertson has been BCC Writing Director since 2002. She holds a BS in Theater from Skidmore College, an MA in English from Columbia Teachers College, and has completed graduate coursework at the NYU School of Educational Theater. She has taught writing, including the CUNY Language Immersion Program, ESL, and freshman composition for 32 years, beginning in independent schools, the Board of Education, later as an adjunct for BCC, Hostos, City College, and in the CLIP program at Hostos. Since 2002, as Writing Center Director, she has been dedicated to teaching Writing Center tutors how to help BCC students write, building confidence in their ideas and experiences, giving them hope, and keeping them in school. We discuss a few of Jan's key formative childhood experiences related to teaching, advice for new teachers, qualities of a good tutor, qualities of a successful writing center, how to better advocate on behalf of a writing center, and more. I think it's important to talk about writing centers and the role they play in providing students with hope and keeping them in school, especially in these difficult post-COVID times. Jan has been a pioneering champion for the BCC Writing Center. My boss for over a decade, she is like a mother figure to me. We've been through many ups and downs. I'm grateful she spent time with me and that with this podcast, I am able to preserve for future generations a glimpse into what she does for students, her pedagogical approaches to tutoring and running a writing center, and her goodwill and love for teaching and otherwise helping to empower any students or educators within reach. I am more than happy to help her in this endeavor. I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Jan Robertson. So first off, thank you so much, Jan, for agreeing to be on my podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
I think I want to start out with asking you about maybe early experiences that you've had, maybe childhood, young adulthood, that have been influential or formative for you. I'm just curious, like what drove you to teaching, to education?
Desperation by accident. No. Well, I mean, my father was a teacher, so I grew up in a house with that. And my mother taught music also. My father taught English and writing. And, I used to see him teaching and bringing home papers and stuff like that. When we were little kids, we always played teacher at school.
Mhm.
And I just remember like pretending to be writing and correcting papers.
Wow, well, that's cool.
But yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time at the school with him after school because he also directed the school plays. So after supper, we would go down to the auditorium, and I would go to all the play rehearsals and memorized all the lines of all the characters and in all the plays he did. And I loved that. And he had his room, and we always went there after school to wait for him to go home. So yeah, and just knowing he was a teacher, and he actually helped me a lot with my writing in many ways. um I used to write stories and give them to him to read, and other papers. I remember he would like cross out stuff and I
Mm,
would be crushed
okay. Yeah.
that I didn't need to say all that, he's tried to teach me to be concise. I don't know if it worked very well because sometimes I'm not that concise, but I remember, I remember that. Just, yeah. So
Mm,
grew up in a environment of education, educator, school.
mm. That's great.
Mhm.
Did you always want to teach, or were there other competing uh, ambitions out there?
I never wanted to teach. If well, I won't say never. People would ask me, oh, if I was going to be a teacher like my father, and I said, never in a million years. And I wanted to be a writer. I used to write short stories and poetry, and an actress. I loved theater and drama. Of course, a lot of that had to do also with going to see the plays that he was directing and the rehearsals that I just told you I would go to all the time. And then I remember once he took me to Williamstown, which is really close to where we live, to see I want to say, I'm trying to think if it was not the chair, the seagull. I think it was Chekhov, and Blythe Danner was a young woman, and she was playing the lead, and I was so enthralled with that real life theater performance at the Williams Playhouse. And I thought that's what I wanted to be doing and where I wanted to be. So, I mean, growing up, I would say we made plays all the time and stories and characters and, made up all those kinds of things. But here's a really funny thing is, so the kids next door, there was a family next door to us, and they had a big, huge, huge house and a little sort of hen house in the back. They had a bunch of outbuildings, and it was wood, and inside it was like this perfect place to play. And it had probably must be where the chickens would sit, with these roost would be these uh, beams, going across. So it was like this. We love to play like pioneers and
Mhm.
like that. This was a one-room schoolhouse, and I had all these clothes and costumes, long skirts that my mother gave us to play. And so that was the one-room schoolhouse, and of course I was the teacher. So,
Mm, mm.
and they were well, I was the oldest for one thing, but I always opted to be the teacher, and that was the schoolhouse. So, but yeah, so there was that combination of writing and creating stories and writing and teaching. So I didn't think I wanted to be. Um, then uh, when I came to New York, and I was pursuing theater, not as passionately or fervently as I should have been. I guess I was very scared and shy, and came from upstate New York, so I didn't really have that kind of confidence maybe in myself that
Mm,
I wish now, if I knew then what I knew now, what I know now. But I was waitressing and taking acting classes, and that was a lot of fun. But then this woman came, and then she was working with us, and she was finishing up. She had just finished her master's, and was had gotten a job. I think I want to say she was an adjunct. Yeah. And was telling me, how much she was making, and I really couldn't stand waitressing too much more. Just, I mean, it was fun and it was pretty good money, but I think that after a while, it's a burnout, it's like mindless or something social. But anyway, her job sounded so interesting. So I thought, well, maybe I could do that and get, so to do both, I could get a degree and be teaching and then also be doing acting, because she was saying, oh yeah, people are photographers, they're this, they're that, and they're teaching.
Sure.
So I went back to school, teachers college, and I got my master's. I guess I sort of stopped pursuing theater somewhere in there. I don't know. I didn't. My acting teacher was really mean after a while. This guy that I was starting to study with, but I just said it was too competitive. Anyway, so I finished that, and yeah, while I was on the path to that, I guess I started substitute teaching, and that was a little crazy, a little rocky. But I remember meeting this one teacher who gave me 2 quotes. He gave me this book of quotes, famous quotes. And he said, this is what you could do as a substitute. You could put it on the board and have them write something, have a discussion about the quote. So I loved that idea, and I tried it, and it worked, and it was fun, and it was like middle school kids, and they really liked it, and they got into the conversation and debate. And so that was a really good piece of advice that I got from that teacher. I don't know. So I can't say that was necessarily like the kicking off point. I wanted to get a job. I needed something, full time. A person needs, after a while, something full time and stable and steady. And I guess, I was kind of really looking for that. And I started to work. Wasn't finished with my master's, and I got a job at an independent school in Queens. And then I was transferred to the Manhattan location, which was much closer and better for me. I don't know what they wanted me to teach, but they sat down. I remember being given, I guess, a schedule and a couple of books. And one of the classes I was supposed to teach was called Life Skills. And it was, I think it was called Becoming a Master's Student. I want to say that was the title of the book. I used to have a copy of it. Oh, maybe I might have a copy of it still. And I might have ordered a new copy and put it in my office. So it was filled with all kinds of really interesting activities and games. And, after taking all those acting classes for so many years, I had a lot of sort of theater games and tricks that I thought I could use, and visualize myself being able to use them, especially with this particular class. So why I'm telling this story is that the first day after she'd give me the book and I took it home and looked at it, and then there was the first day and I went back and she walked me down the hall. I didn't have a lesson plan per se. I had something I thought I would do. I didn't like plan out my week to week schedule. It was like, I didn't know what. And she opened the door for the classroom. Now, it wasn't an auditorium per se, but they were on steps, right? So it was this actually fairly narrow little room. I don't know why it was set up that way, like a lecture hall or something, because it wasn't that big, but it was packed. And I gasped out loud. Just like that. That was the first impression. But I just kind of like went in and decided I would dive in, and after that gasp, kind of introduce myself, and I asked everybody if they knew what free writing was. I guess I must have already taken the course in the teaching of writing and read Peter Elbow, and I really loved it. So a lot of them sort of knew what it was, and then I explained to them what it was. And then I went to the board and I wrote in big gigantic letters, procrastinate or procrastination. I think I wrote procrastinate. And I asked them to brainstorm. I might have asked them to talk to each other actually about and brainstorm lists of how they procrastinate when they have to do a job. What did it mean and how do they go about? So they came up with like a million things, and I was just throwing them out, and I was writing everything on the board. Like, what do you want to do when you have to clean your room? Suddenly I need to make a cup of coffee. Suddenly I have to make that phone call. So, and so I like everything, and I was writing, and they just had so much fun with that activity. And I was so relieved that I thought of something that was engaging. So after that, I felt good. I felt okay, that worked. Other teaching hadn't sort of worked, but that might have been a kickoff moment. First the gasp, and then the word on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then also in that same term where they called it module, I started using some of my theater games that I had learned in my acting classes. And I remember one of them was written on a little 3x5 card. You have two people, and you ask, what'd you do last night? Not much. Watch a little TV. Anything good on? No, not much. Well, goodbye. That's all the dialogue is, but you set up the situation. You run into your friend that you could come up with some, big thing. It could be, he borrowed your car and wrecked it, or you borrowed his car and, or it could be something more subtle, could be parent and child, and, you came in late. I don't know. So you come up with all these scenarios and the different ways that people talk to each other. I remember that. And that was a really fun exercise. So yeah, I would say that class, that course. And then I started teaching writing like that. I had a writing class. So I would just start doing that, realizing that you really had to come up with surprising, fun things that you throw at them to do and have them talk with each other and engage, and activities and games that will engage them.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Teaching is kind of like that, especially early on. It seemed like you had like a fight or flight sort of a moment there where, there was that initial surprise, and then you
Yeah,
decided to tackle that head on.
I had no choice. This
Right.
is your class and you're teaching it. Oh, really?
There was no flight in that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, and so I'm naturally pretty introverted, and it's difficult, definitely initially, to teach, right? Because it's very different, standing in front of the class, than sitting in the seat.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's all about you and what you do and what you say, and and you have the plan, and you're supposed to know what you're supposed to know. um so yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Do you have any maybe advice for new teachers? I think you gave a lot of interesting um, advice, maybe implicitly, about things that you can do to get students engaged and participating and so on. But I'm curious, since you've been teaching a long time,
Yeah.
and I've been teaching not for as long, but do you have any advice for like new teachers who don't have maybe the acting experience, or maybe not as confident in front of a crowd?
I think that a lot of educational courses in education are using that kind of approach now, that really pedagogies of engagement. Well, I would have to say that every semester, every new class is terrifying to me. I know the students are also sitting there nervous and scared, and they don't realize that I feel the same way. I never know, are they going to like me? Are they not going to like me? What do they see when they look at me? You know, what do I come across as? You know, there's nothing worse than the feeling that your students may not like you, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, and or the like your course or the material that you've created, that you've generated, that the lessons that you've, you know, worked so hard to put together. So I think that the first it is important, those first few days, that you have exactly knowing what you're doing, because they will pick up on that. And I think once, if you get them talking to each other, put them in groups, have them and give them some topic that's going to be really interesting to talk about. I would say, you know, find a story that they're going to, that's going to be really interesting to them. And I've chosen that Chinua Achebe story, Marriage is a Private Affair, for many years.
Mm.
And it has some really great themes that I put them in conversation, in groups, to have conversations about. Even in Zoom, I put them in breakout rooms, and they really like it because it breaks the ice for them. Um, it gives them a chance to talk to each other. I should say the first thing I do actually is the first day they introduced each other, they introduce themselves to each other. First, I have them pair up. And this is also a theater game. There's a couple of things. I have them pair up and introduce themselves to one partner. And they have to come up with something really interesting about themselves, like, oh, yes, I bake cakes for the royal family, or I go scuba diving, or something like that. I don't know, something that's unique. Then they have to go with their partner to two other people and introduce your partner to the two other people. The partner can't introduce themselves. You have to introduce your partner. Then when you have the four, then you link them up with eight. And so that's sort of like the class. And then you have them sort of mingling. So I think the key is getting the students to talk to each other soon and in a fun, interesting way. Then the next thing is I start, before the story, I have some pre-reading exercises, and the first pre-reading is a talking, where they get in groups and they talk about certain themes that are related to the story. You know, obedience to parent. Have you ever had a friend that your parents didn't like? Is one of them. That's one of the themes. Like, what do you know about arranged marriages? So they get into these conversations with each other in groups. And all I can say is the more they interact and the less you do, the better.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Um, yeah, I guess I really agree with what you said earlier about knowing your material. You know, it's like, as you alluded to earlier, sometimes like how much time you have to prepare for something like this is not much. You know, sometimes you don't get the class that you think that you're going to get, or um, something changes. You know, there was COVID and so on. So the better prepared you can be, I think, for sure, that definitely helps me. Um, if you're introverted, you know, I think doing workshops, being more social, forcing yourself to do more social things, I think helps.
Well, I think that one of the things that experience and years have is a bag of tricks. You have dozens of lessons that you know work, because activities that you've tried again and again and that have worked every time, or 99.9% of the time. And ones that don't, I've tossed out. I don't even know what they are, I guess, anymore, because I tried them and it didn't work. But you could say, okay, I can do this or I can do that. And you know, you say you're introverted, but I've observed you teaching workshops, and I found you to be very interesting and prepared, and your activities were, you know, got everybody engaged. Yeah, I so I wouldn't say, maybe you feel like that as a person, but as a teacher, it's like, a lot of people who are actors, and I wrote a paper comparing theater and teaching, actually, when I was in Teachers College. Yeah.
I was thinking about this actually, like if there's a connection while you were talking, but I didn't get to ask, but go ahead.
Yeah, I did. I wrote about it, and that even that, you have the script and the audience, and yet it's sort of, I won't say Brechtian, because you're not speaking out at the audience. It's the kind of theater where the students are sort of the audience as well as the other actors in your play, and your lesson is your script, and so you have to be receptive to their response. um I got into it. I have to go back and look at that paper because I went into it, in much more depth. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who are very shy who are actually brilliant actors, and you would never know that they were shy, because when you're acting, you're beyond taking on a new persona. It's actually not taking on a new persona. Acting is actually bringing out parts of yourself and putting them together into somebody else, into the
Mm,
spirit of another person, let's say. But it's still
okay.
you have to be natural in yourself, if that makes any sense. I mean, if you had studied acting, you would know exactly what I'm talking about, but I'm not. I don't think I'm being very clear. A lot of people think acting is pretending. Well, it is, but it isn't. It really isn't, because you have to be yourself.
Mm,
But you're being yourself as someone else in another environment with other people that are connected to you, with other aspects of your personality that are important, that come out. And you actually, when you're an actor, you recreate, you create a new person from you. It's
mm,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think that teaching is somewhat similar to that. I guess I could say that when I go into a classroom and I feel comfortable after a while, I'm on, as they would
Sure.
say. So
Yeah, I think, well, first off, I appreciate uh, the words of encouragement and everything. I think it's very situational, like people's introversion or if they're shy, however they define it. Um, I find myself in some social situations feeling very relaxed, like around the writing center. I feel maybe it's partly because of how I feel with the people around. It's the writing center is like a second home to me. It was my
mhm.
first job, and I've spent a lot of time with you guys, with the fellow tutors, and with you, Jan, seeing you every day or every other day. Um, and so, yeah, I don't know what to say other than it is situational, and like some situations can be super comfortable and you feel like the expert, what's going on. And in other situations, you feel like, I haven't had enough time to get this going. Maybe this is a hostile crowd, and you kind of tense up. That's kind of how it is with me. But anyway, I wanted to ask you now, why did you go into writing center work? Um, you know, it
Oh my good God, that was an accident. Yeah, I'd been a classroom teacher from 1987 to 89, and I took like a 6-month break. Then I went back. Um, and I taught for the Board of Ed in 1990, and then was teaching and teaching and taught for CLIP, did all this teaching. So again, that was after I'd left that independent school, and I really liked, as soon as I started for teaching for CUNY, I was happy and I liked it and I loved the students, and I wanted a full-time job. And so in the mid 90s, Marianne Pita was my friend. She and I had sort of started roughly around the same time. I think I started a few years earlier than she did. Um, but she had her degree in ESL or something, and so she got hired. And then I was hired in a full-time subline. Anyway, I wanted a full-time job. I taught for CLIP. It was too much. I wasn't happy there. Was at Hostos, and I really wanted to be at Bronx. I don't know. I felt that's where my community was, my family. I had the ESL, a whole ESL department. They were, my friends, like you say about the writing center, my family. So when I was at Hostos, all I would talk about was how much better it was at the Bronx. Um, so Marianne told me about this writing center director position. I guess it was in the summer of 2002. I didn't think I was going to stay in it, but I needed to get a job that had benefits and a full-time salary. And, the one thing about being an adjunct and I guess being a single parent is that every January, if I wasn't teaching in January, after a while I was, but there are always these huge breaks in your pay, right? So, and then sometimes even when you work, you don't get paid. So that was tough. So I jumped at this position, and it was like it wasn't, what do they call that? It was a temporary position funded by Research Foundation. And I guess they'd gone through 3 people already who had worked and quit and worked and quit. They didn't like it. And they were working on the space in Philosophy Hall. They had gotten a Title V grant. And so, the other thing was, I had worked in the past. We used to have this PASS center that was in Sage Hall. And that was like in 1994, I had worked there as this tutoring coordinator, the temporary job that a woman who had the job was sick and she had cancer. So I took it for a while. Right. And then right after that, I think that was right after that I was working for another thing under Ray Hubner. Then I went into the full-time stuff. But so the reason I say that is that Marcia Keyes was the vice president, and she needed somebody to be the director of this center because they had gone out and gotten this huge grant to move the tutoring that had been in that little teeny room on the 6th floor of Colston to a writing center. Now, Marcia has a PhD in English, so she had traveled around the country and seen writing centers that were taking off. Those were the years when writing centers really, even though they had been around for many, many years, obviously, but they were really kind of like exploding all over the country, and colleges and universities adopting them. So she wanted one of that like that for Bronx, and she was the vice president of academic affairs. So she headed up this grant, and they couldn't get somebody to stay. I don't know what that problem was, but anyway, I guess Marianne or somebody said, I have this person who would be really good. She has experience in teaching ESL, and she has experience in tutoring and da da da. So she called me up and she interviewed me on the phone and said, I think that you sound good. So she hired me.
Mhm.
But it was just supposed to be a temporary position until the college took it up, and then they finally opened up the position in 2004. And I had been having kind of a good time. I mean, I went to the first conference in Hershey, Pennsylvania in the following year in like 2003. I think it was before I was hired. I don't really remember. It's kind of all blur, those early years. But that was a really eye-opening experience going to that NCPTW. It was a joint conference of NCPTW and IWCA, and I met these people, and there was so much phenomenal energy at this conference. It was so exciting, and people were talking about writing center work, and I got these books, and I met, Ben Rafith and a whole bunch of other, bigwigs in the field, and I just, went to sessions and I said, oh, this is great. And I went back and wanted to inspire everybody at the Writing Center. Then at some point the position opened up and I applied for it, and I got hired. Again, there were several times where things were kind of rocky and I wasn't going to stick around, except that I stick around when things get rocky because I don't want to walk away from something unless it's a success. And then once it's success, I don't want to walk away.
Okay.
A couple times I was going to apply for the full-time teaching line in English. But anyway, I stayed with the Writing Center work, and things got better and better. And yeah.
Yeah, people don't know outside of writing centers just how passionate, some people can be educators, writing center people can be about writing centers. And so there are these conferences, national conferences, all across the country that talk about writing center pedagogy and what writing centers can do to get better outreach or to advocate their cause and so on. So yeah, and it's really important, and I feel like the Bronx Community College Writing Center is of course largely successful because of you, because of your direction. And I think it's because you're passionate about writing centers, writing center pedagogy, and the community. And this is kind of, and for you, these conventions were instrumental, seminal in that. So
Absolutely, because I saw I learned what Writing Center work was. In those first years, I think I bought like every book possible on Writing Center theory and practice. I mean, I didn't know there was such a thing. And when I started reading it, it made so much sense because it really was, I'm on the same page with that. It's all about student-centered work. It's about listening. It's about empowering and eliciting responses and all those kinds of things, those approaches to my teaching of writing anyway. So yeah, and when I saw all these other people that were on the same page as I was, it was very inspirational. And you have to bring that. I tried to bring that to our center, and also to bring the students in. One of the first things that I did was we had, remember we had the computer lab, and they wanted that to be the tutoring to go on in the computer lab. And I thought that wasn't the best choice. I thought if we bring whole classes down there and have teachers book their classes, which I know they're always using computer labs, that the students would then see where we were. They would see that we're there and the tutors were there and that they would come. And it worked. It worked. Absolutely, because sometimes I would send the tutor into the classroom to work with the teacher, or the teacher would say, go work with the tutor. But just the fact that they got to learn where the Writing Center was and that it was a happening place. I remember one who, I don't remember who it was. It was some administrator who came down and said that the Writing Center was like one of the most vibrant places on the campus. And I thought that was such a tremendous compliment to all of us, because it was, students were pouring in there. They were waiting for tutors. The tutors loved what they were doing. We had pictures on the wall. We had, all kinds of interesting things to look at, and posters and events and stuff. So
yeah, absolutely agreed. I mean, the Writing Center is like it's a hub of people who want to communicate and want to get better, so they have a certain feeling, a certain optimism if you're getting tutoring, yes, many people say they're not good writers, but like there's a certain community in a good writing center where one that maybe is holding events as the Bronx Community College Writing Center does, with the Poets Cafes and with workshops and things like that. So yeah, I think it's caring about what you do, and it rubs off. I wanted to ask you about I guess the tutoring is an important part of writing center work, right? It's the currency, if you will, of writing centers. So what is your perspective on what makes a good tutor and maybe what makes a not so good tutor? And then maybe, does that bleed over to a concept that you have inculcated in the tutors at BCC, which is, we're tutors, we're not editors.
I guess to start with, I always loved writing since I was a little, started writing, and even started, writing poetry when I was, in third grade, whatever. And as I said, short stories. So I love writing, and I know how important it is. And I think one of the things is that so many students think that they're bad writers. And I think that one of the most important things to start with to teach a tutors, first of all, that I love writing, and when I love something, I want everyone to love it. And so that the students need to know that they can write. Don't worry what other people have told you. Don't worry about what teachers have told you. We're going to help you find the best way to say what you want to say, or a better way to say what you're trying to say. I think that's the first thing is the mindset of the tutor, that every student who comes and works with you is somebody who has the ability and can do it. And you have to find a way to help them to do it, not to do it for them, but to give them, to empower them, and through eliciting. So what makes a good tutor is somebody who's a really great listener, who knows how to ask the right questions about an assignment, about the student's ideas, and then to listen to what the student has to say, and to encourage the student then to write down what they've said. And I mean, there's so many strategies. Even, I think about one student that came in once and said she didn't have anything to say and she didn't know what to write. And I just took my notebook and I started asking her questions, and she was answering, and I wrote down everything that she said. And it went on for like maybe 2 or 3 pages. And then I said, there. And she said, oh, I said all that. I said, those aren't my words. I said, I just wrote what you said. Oh, okay. And she went into the quiet writing room and wrote her paper, and she was like dancing. She was so happy. And I really didn't do that much except ask her questions. So I think that's a lot of tutors who come in and they think that there's nothing to learn about tutoring. And I think that if you have that, then you've closed the door already, because, as a teacher, we're constantly learning. We never stop learning. Every semester, every lesson, every class is a learning experience. And so there's so much to learn about tutoring and tutoring writing, knowing what you're looking at when the student brings the paper. What am I looking at, and what's working, and what is the student struggling with, and then asking what questions, what does the student want to work on? And again, giving that power to the student. What do you want to work on today? You're the driver. And then letting the student express their ideas and finding ways to ask questions to get them to express themselves. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't teach them, okay, I'm struggling with how to write a thesis statement. So you have to also learn how to use all the supplemental materials to give instruction. So there's that. And And that's really helpful because, and then getting them to practice something in front of you. So if it's whatever it is, you do not, okay, now let's see, write a thesis statement. You've learned how to do it. You've seen a sample. Let's see if you can craft one. And if they can do that while you're watching and then talk about it and get it better. Or if it's grammar, whatever grammar point, have them practice. Teach them the lesson and have them practice in front of you until you can see that they have grasped it. So there is instruction that's involved, but there's also a lot of listening, a lot of asking questions.
It
So
almost seems like the way that you were describing it is like you're giving them hope in a sense, right? Like that their ideas are worth it, that maybe they don't think of themselves as a good writer. And if you've worked at a writing center, you know that like most students who come to writing centers have that kind of mentality. Letting them know that they can get better at this thing, you know, and sometimes it's stigma because they're ESL, right? English is not their first language and they speak with an accent. And so they feel like this is a insurmountable climb that they have to do. And as a tutor, you're kind of letting them know, you know, somebody who's been to the mountaintop, so to speak, that they can get there, right? But it takes, you know, steps, right?
it's not insurmountable. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to get to the top, you start with a step, right? And that's really important for me too. Like, for example, when I teach a research paper, you know, it's like, seems the final product seems overwhelming to some, but I really try to, as I've learned from you, to like how to break that down for students, so that they understand each individual step is actually not that hard and I can do this.
Right.
So
Yes, I like that you said we give them hope. I think that's exactly right. So students come to us looking for that hope after they've been there once and you know, they might feel scared the first time. That's why I like to give tours, have teachers give tours of the writing center because the students come in and they look around and they might be afraid because I don't blame them. You know, you're sitting down with a stranger who's going to read your words and you feel so completely vulnerable and you don't know what they're going to
yes.
say. They might be mean, they might criticize you or, you know, and I know that there are tutors out there who do that, who are, you know, snarky and rude. And I've seen people even working in our writing center. They're not working with us anymore, but that I would listen and it's like, no, that's not it. That's not working. What I call the scolding approach.
Just to echo what you're saying, like it's important to understand how vulnerable the students are, and it might not be apparent to you initially because sometimes people are really good at putting on a facade of confidence when they're really in a vulnerable spot. And somebody who's taken part in writing workshops where I have my creative writing critiqued, right? It is a very, very vulnerable thing, right? People are looking at the thing that you created that's
right,
exemplary of your brain, your mind, and your creativity and your direction, and they're questioning it. You know, it's like
right,
yeah, yes,
right. Well, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Put yourself in their shoes. When we did those writing groups that summer, and you all came up with that really wonderful collection. And one of the things I think that that Peter Elbow says to do in that group is first look for everything that's working. Tell the writer, give the writer positive feedback. You don't have to critique them right away. And because, you know, especially if you open the floor to critiquing right away, everybody becomes the critic and they know exactly, like, please, you don't know what you're doing. So just be quiet. Just look for the things that are working that you like as a reader. Look at it as a reader. What really drew you in? You don't have to sit there and try to correct the paper. And that's the one thing I've seen in tutors that didn't have that kind of training, is the first thing that they want to do is grab the pen, grab the paper, and start correcting. And half the time they correct things that there's nothing wrong with and just make it different, you know. And well, and I saw that when I first became the director of the Writing Center, and I saw some tutors that were working that way. And I would say, well, why? I said to the student, I looked at the paper and I said, why did the tutor cross that out? And I don't know, they just trusted the tutor was right. And meanwhile, there was nothing wrong with the way the student had said it. When I asked the tutor, he said, well, I just thought that the word I chose was better. It sounded better. Well, that's exactly the reason why they don't have confidence in themselves, when you talk like that, when you give them that feeling that you have a better word than they do. Not that they shouldn't learn other words, but anyway.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is you're trying to preserve their voice and
Yeah.
their ideas and their phrasing and so on. You might have a better word, but it might not be their word.
That's right.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I don't want to talk too much about this, but in grad school, I kind of felt like that one time where one teacher sort of, made a whole bunch of grammatical things. And this was after I had already started working at the Writing Center. So it felt a little bit like, not that they weren't helpful suggestions, but that they were subjective and not objective grammatical mistakes.
Right.
But anyway, what do you think writing centers that succeed, what do you think they do right? And for writing centers maybe that are doing it wrong, what do you think they're doing wrong?
That's an interesting question. I think one of the things the director has to be flexible with the staff to a certain extent in terms of their schedule and the things that they want. I mean, tutors can come to me with ideas, and a lot of the things that we have done in the Writing Center has come from the community, our community, suggestions that were made. And because you're the ones that are doing the work and sort of on the floor, and so you come and say, this isn't working, or this is working, what we need is this, what we need is that. And a lot of times I've taken them into consideration, and our Writing Center has evolved as such. That doesn't mean that every single idea, I may not take every idea. I might say, no, I don't like that. I want it like this. And and that's my responsibility, I guess, to make those decisions. So I'd say flexibility. I think finding ways to help the tutors feel really invested in their work. And I would say when the tutors started going to the conferences, that first conference that we went to, where the whole 16 people went in Baltimore, I would say that was the seminal event that changed the entire trajectory of our Writing Center. People, they got it. They were like, oh, we're not just this little place in the basement of Philosophy Hall. We belong to a national organization, a community of people that is enormous, and that they got to talk to tutors from Idaho and California and Florida and West Virginia and Maine. And it was so amazing to them. And it was, just the whole environment. First of all, the lunch with the speaker was like in this huge, there were 900 people there, this huge ballroom with, crystal chandeliers. And then there were all these events, music events and little speakers and events for the tutors, and always food. There was always, and books to look at. And so it was kind of like, a smorgasbord. It was like going to I don't know, a county fair, I guess, in a way, where they were like, "Oh, running, look at this, and what about this, and look at this. Did you see that?" And then staying overnight in the hotel, and it was road trip and getting on the bus. So coming back, it really, they got it and started listening and started paying attention to the texts, and yeah, changing the way they worked, and saw themselves in their in the play in that they had a place in this world of writing centers, and that we were a very important part of the college. So I think that's important. Obviously, so I'm saying the tutors are important. Um, as are because the students are important. And so you have to find ways, make sure that the tutors are working with the students in the right way, making them feel that they have hope, listening to them, teaching compassion. The tutors have to be compassionate, and also reaching out to the faculty. So there's a lot of outreach that has to go on, and you have to listen to what the faculty say, even though they say, "Oh, well, you aren't correcting our papers." So then you have to give them instruction and why it's working, because other teachers will come in and say, "Oh, you guys are miracle workers." So it's having a good staff, it's teaching the tutors all of those things, it's getting them involved in the National um, Writing Center Association, the community, um, outreach, events, workshops.
Mm.
Um, so I think that those are the kinds of things that make our writing center and other writing centers work, that I've been inspired by others that do work. Um, I'm not sure. Then did you ask me why is it that some don't get it?
Yeah, right. I mean, it implies ones that don't maybe succeed or aren't as good as they could be from your perspective, and I would concur with you, are not doing some of the things that you talked about, right?
Yeah, well, what I've just thought, I'll probably be thinking of things late tonight too. Oh, another thing.
Sure.
I think that I was thinking about this earlier, actually, that there are places, as we know, where the students make appointments, and if they don't show up, they get penalized. If you have so many times that you're either late for your appointment or you don't show up, you're not allowed to come back to the writing center for the rest of the semester. They also have limitations. Oh, you've already been here twice this week. And what do these ESL students think? What do they think we are? I've seen those conversations on my IWCA listserv. And Kanisha is on that also. And so we get conversations about that. And that's one of the reasons why for years I didn't want to have appointments, because I know our students have very complicated lives, and for them to keep an appointment, the one time that I had appointments was during a Easter break, and I was the only one there, and I took appointments, and not a single person who signed up on the list ahead of time showed up, and only one of them called to cancel. But yet I was busy all day, every day with walk-ins. So I said, okay, that is very telling. That's who our population is. And I'm certainly not going to say you've been here too many times, or you've been here too long today, because we know that sometimes students take a whole day off from work just to be able to come to work on their stuff in the writing center. So we have to be flexible with that. Obviously, there have been times where we've been so busy that we can't allow a student to have back appointments when other people are waiting. And then, of course, being online has changed everything.
Mm.
And I think that the appointment thing seems to be working. So we'll probably keep it with also accepting walk-ins. I mean, let's see what it is when we go back in person, right? So there's that, the flexibility with the staff, flexibility with the students. You have to be flexible. You can't be rigid.
Mm.
You can't be rigid.
Yeah. Right. And I would just also add, good leadership. And I think part of what makes good leadership is, as we sort of stated earlier, it's being inspiring by being inspired, and whether you're teaching or you're writing center director, I think that it's or you're a tutor, I think it's contagious, and it's just a good way to role model behavior.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
yes.
you have to be, I think being, one of the things is, you asked me earlier, so I feel like I'm a very optimistic and positive person. And so I think, and so yes, coming into work every day saying, okay, let's do this.
Mhm.
To be the kind of person who says, let's do this. And there are so many people on our campus, so many people everywhere who are no people, and who, nah, that won't work, that won't work. And yet I know we know each other. The ones who are the let's do this kind of people on campus, we connect, we know each other.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the last serious question or big question I want to ask is, uh, and some of this, there's some overlap with the last question about writing centers and what they do right and what they do wrong. But how can writing centers better advocate themselves to the administration? Because as you've told me many times, can be a very big hurdle for writing centers, and but also to the public,
Mm.
you know, which sometimes that can be a hurdle as well.
I wish I knew. I mean, one of the first things that, when President Second became president, I did was to invite him over to the writing center, if you remember. And he was really great. That was unusual. He spent a whole hour with us. And so that was major, because after that, he loved us. He loved the work. He was so impressed by the display out in the lobby and the map on the wall and all the work that we're doing in the books. And we showed him, I think, our video, um, that he supported us, like whenever I needed something. I did not have that same experience with some of the other administrators, the little lesser administrators. And there have been some people who, no matter what I said or did, I couldn't convince them. We just have to keep trying and, going out into classrooms, doing presentations at our own BCC, like faculty conferences that we've done, making sure that we're doing workshops in not just English department classes, but in other classes, like such as you did the geo poetry. And then word gets around, like that, you would be surprised. People talk to each other about what, you're always going to have some that, no matter what we do, there's nothing that's going to make them happy. But then there are others whose minds we've changed. When we had that our open house when we first moved over to Sage, and there were I think Daniel did the presentation that we have of what does a writing center do. It's a PowerPoint, and he was presenting that in 100D, and there were a whole bunch of people sitting around, and one of them was a friend of mine who'd been in counseling. She completely was an eye opener for her. Totally changed everything that she thought about the writing center, because students had come to her and complaining that we weren't correcting the paper or the whatever. And then she got it. She got it about the listening and encouraging and eliciting responses and getting the students to write and feel confident in their writing. After that, she was like one of the writing center best friends. So it can work. It doesn't always, but we just have to keep trying and doing more events. I think our spoken word events help. I'm hoping that our BCC Tutors Alliance conferences start helping, because the interesting thing of it was many administrators didn't even know that it happened, the first one we did, even though we knew it was like 150 people from all over CUNY came. But there were people on our campus that didn't hear about it. I don't know how. It was broadcast all over the place. But anyway, yeah. Make yourself visible. We have to be visible.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, you have to keep trying and keep putting yourself out there, and if you do good work, I think people will notice. I think that's kind of part of what you're saying.
Newsletters, workshops.
Yeah, sometimes the flyers and be online and being online. I think we also have a Facebook. We have a Facebook page. I'll link that.
I post our flyers up all the time. Every week. I just posted the one up for this week.
Beautiful. This has been a great conversation. I'm very happy with the information that's out there, and putting a spotlight on you, the work that you do at the Writing Center, the BCC Writing Center. Finally, I don't know if maybe there is something I neglected to mention that you want to talk about, or if you have maybe a parting message that you want to share. I want to give you that opportunity to do that now, if you would like.
Not really, just that writing is essential to all academic subjects. Reading and writing are joined at the hip, and so the better a student becomes as a writer, the better they are as a reader. The more they read, the better they're writing. And that even connects to all subjects, including science and even math, because if you can read your math textbook, you might understand how to do the problem.
Yes. Well, thank you again. And
Thank you for having me.
and
I hope I answered all your questions.
yeah, absolutely. And thank you for anybody who's listening or watching. Music for Gymnog Pod, provided by Marcos de la Guagua. Guagua is spelled G-U-A-G-U-A. Art by Seco 1844. Seco is S-E-K-O. My website, which contains news, bios, social media links, a bibliography, a blog, a podcast page, and a press page, is jamesnoguera.com. Noguera is N-O-G-U-E-R-A. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Gymnog. That's J-I-M-N-O-G. Or you can support the show on patreon.com/Gymnog. And thank you for your interest.